It's not very often that you hear about a massive protest against the military in Pakistan. The military is all pervasive and all powerful in Pakistan, but now tens of thousands of Pashtuns have taken to the streets to challenge its might. They have been threatened, they've been told to stop, they've been blacked out from the press, but after decades of suffering at the hands of the Pakistani establishment, the Pashtuns want to push their campaign. The demand is very simple: basic rights, a life of dignity, a guarantee that they will not be treated as second-class citizens in their own country. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll tell you the story of these Pashtuns. How did they end up in Pakistan? And how this is one of the many burning borders that the British have left behind in South Asia. The region continues to suffer the legacy of the blunders of the Raj. We'll talk about that. Also on the show, it was an eventful weekend for China. The Dragon opened 2 new fronts by carrying out military sorties in the Taiwan Strait and threatening the US with Hollywood clips. Who is your enemy? This is the question that Switzerland is now debating after the government proposed to spend more than $6 billion on new fighter jets. You ever had too much money but had too little ideas on how to spend it? Spain is facing a similar crisis. We tell you all about it on the show tonight. And it's a lady versus the lady in Myanmar. 53-year-old leader taking on Aung San Suu Kyi as the country heads to polls in less than 2 months from now. We'll discuss all of that, but first, as always, Gravitas Global Headlines.
The 2020 United Nations General Assembly session begins today. The session kicks off with a high-level meeting to commemorate the United Nations' 75th anniversary. The theme for the event is "The Future We Want, the UN We Need," reaffirming our collective commitment to multilateralism. According to an exposé by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and other media organizations, several global banks moved large sums of allegedly illicit funds for nearly 2 decades. A Pakistani national, Altaf Kanani, is named as a key financier for fugitive terrorist Dawood Ibrahim. Reportedly, Kanani kingpinned a flourishing money laundering network involving drug cartels and terror organizations like the Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah and the Taliban. The Sensex dived 812 points while the Nifty closed below the 11,300 mark on Monday, in tandem with the global sell-off after a resurgence of coronavirus cases in Europe stoked fears of another round of lockdowns. Investors have lost $57.46 billion. China will lose access to a strategic space tracking station in Western Australia when its contract expires. The decision will cut into Beijing's expansion of space exploration and navigational capabilities in the Pacific region. Anti-restrictions protests take place in London, Berlin and Madrid as Europe struggles with the second wave of coronavirus infections. New lockdown restrictions have been imposed in parts of the UK, France, Spain, Germany, the Czech Republic and Denmark. The gradual rise in Europe's second wave of cases is partly due to relaxation of public health and social measures and the people dropping their guard. Russia has kicked off its large-scale week-long Caucasus 2020 military exercises in southern Russia. The exercises will involve 1,000 military personnel from China, Iran, Belarus, Armenia, Myanmar and Pakistan. The 17th century architectural marvel, the Taj Mahal, shut since March 17th due to the COVID-19 pandemic, opened for public from today. Tight COVID-19 protocol has been put in place for checking tourists entering the monument. Around 270 whales are stranded on a sandbar off the remote west coast of the Australian island of Tasmania. Marine biologists are planning a rescue of the whales, 25 of which are believed to have already died. The Sensex dived 812 points, while the Nifty closed below the 11,300 mark on Monday, in tandem with the global sell-off after a resurgence of coronavirus cases in Europe stoked fears of another round of lockdowns. Investors have lost $57.46 billion. Top seed Simona Halep has won the Italian Open in Rome after defending champion and second seed Karolina Pliskova retired due to an injury at the start of the second set. Pliskova entered the match with her thigh tightly strapped and was visibly in discomfort as Romania's Halep played her off the park and won 6-0 in just 20 minutes. Pliskova took a 20-minute-long timeout between sets and resumed the match, winning her first game. Halep broke her to go 2-1 up, and the Czech threw in the towel at that point. This is Halep's 22nd WTA title and 9th on clay, and marks her out as the favorite for next week's French Open, which she won previously in 2018.
Alexander the Great had a long list of achievements. He single-handedly led his armies to victory across Persia, Asia Minor, Syria and Egypt. By the age of 25, he was given the title of the Great King. In the next 8 years, Alexander built an empire that stretched across 3 continents. But when Alexander the Great went up against the Pashtuns, he took an arrow in his leg and almost lost his life. This happened in the 4th century BC. The valor of the Pashtuns is legendary, and now, many centuries later, they're out to take on a new adversary, the Pakistani military. The Pashtuns are protesting decades of oppression. They're shaking the throne of these generals. Look at these pictures on your screen. This happened on Sunday, a long march by the Pashtuns. Thousands marched against the Pakistani army in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. For the Pakistan military, their worst nightmare has just come true, a grassroots campaign that challenges their grip on power. This is a civil rights movement in Pakistan. You may not find these images in the Pakistani media. They've largely ignored this because giving the Pashtuns a platform is challenging the military itself. The Pakistani media, you see, is censoring and blacking out even political leaders. What chance do these Pashtuns have? The people you see on your screen are supporters of the Pashtun Tehfooz movement, the PTM. They're also known as the Pashtun Protection Movement. They came to prominence in the year 2018, and their campaign has been gaining traction since. It began in Waziristan, a remote town along Pakistan's border with Afghanistan. The PTM tapped into the anger of the Pashtuns, the discrimination they faced, the violence perpetrated by Pakistan-backed Taliban, and the anger against the military. The Pashtuns hold the Pakistani military responsible for the death and displacement of thousands of people. They say they're treated as second-class citizens, an ethnic minority denied even the basic rights in Pakistan. The Pashtuns are fighting for their right to life. And the Pakistani army wants to suppress their campaign. The protest has got the attention of the world, and despite a media blackout, they found support within Pakistan. We've seen 3 major protests that shook up the Pakistani military establishment in the past few years. In February 2018, the PTM staged a sit-in protest in Islamabad, followed by demonstrations in all major Pakistani cities. Almost a year later, hundreds of young men and women marched in Lahore. They had 3 demands: freedom of expression, respect for the Constitution, and civil rights. The rally was called Citizen Protection March. 2 months later, tens of thousands of people demonstrated in North Waziristan. All of these rallies had one popular slogan: the uniform is behind all the terrorism, they said. The Pakistani army is not used to such opposition at home. What did it do? It blamed the invisible foreign hand. It's an old tactic to discredit a domestic opponent. In February last year, Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani tweeted a statement. He was concerned about the violence during peaceful protests in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. An activist had died in a police crackdown. Here is how Pakistan responded. It said the protesters were being, quote-unquote, manipulated by hostile external elements. They even went to the extent of calling this a 5th-generation warfare. This is classic Pakistani military. It believes Pakistan is always in a state of war because Pakistan is a security state. When a threat to the army, in fact, is considered a threat to the entire country. And the Pashtun protests pose a direct challenge to the military establishment. The military is rattled, and with good reason, because this is how movements begin. When thousands of people take to the streets despite threats to life, this is how dictators are dethroned. Pakistan is witnessing an uprising. It was a long time in the making. The Pashtuns of Pakistan have suffered for decades. Their land has been used as a crucible for Pakistan's terrorist experiments. They've been targeted, they've been left homeless as Pakistan tried to prove it is acting against terrorists. They've been denied basic rights in their own country and treated as second-class citizens. This is the story of Pakistan's Pashtuns.
The Pashtuns are Pakistan's largest ethnic minority. Now they are also the symbol of resistance. Out on the streets in the thousands, fighting decades of discrimination and oppression. Their home is called the FATA, or the federally administered tribal areas. Most of Pakistan's 20 million Pashtuns live here. But until 2018, they did not even enjoy any citizenship rights. After the partition in 1947, the Pakistani military focused its attention on the Indian border. The FATA remained largely ignored, treated differently from the rest of Pakistan. This is among the least developed areas in Pakistan. Its unsettled legal status allowed the Pakistani military to exploit it. The Pashtuns perpetually remained in the line of fire and bereft of any benefits. In 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, the United States reached out to Pakistan. A United States-Saudi Arabia-Pakistan alliance funded Mujahideen fighters. FATA served as the training ground for the operation. America's alliance with Pakistan had unintended consequences. The Pashtuns were the casualty. Look at the sequence of events. In the 90s, Pakistan backed the Taliban. They fought for power in Afghanistan. In 2001, America declared a war on the Taliban. They took refuge in FATA. Since 9/11, the tribal areas of Pakistan have become a major theatre for militancy and terrorism. Under pressure from America, the Pakistani army has conducted 10 operations. The terrorists flourished, but the Pashtuns suffered. By 2010, more than 1 million Pashtuns were displaced. According to one report, at least 70,000 Pashtuns have been killed in the last 16 years. More than 1,000 tribal elders have been killed. Thousands of Pashtuns have disappeared. The tribes are trapped as outsiders fight on their lands. They have seen no development for years now. According to the United Nations Development Programme, FATA has consistently ranked the lowest in education, health and standard of living. On average, a child in FATA spends less than 7 years in a school. Healthcare facilities are non-existent. And in the garb of fighting terrorism, the Pakistani military keeps targeting the Pashtuns. In 2018, FATA was merged with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but it made no difference to the life of the Pashtuns. Then came the extrajudicial killing of an aspiring model. It was the proverbial last straw. Thousands marched across major cities of Pakistan. The movement has not stopped since. Even threats by Pakistani generals have failed to stop them.
लेकिन अब जिस तरफ ये जा रहे हैं,
in the direction they are going, it will come to the stage where they will cross the line and we will have to use our authority.
अपनी authority इस्तेमाल करनी पड़े.
In FATA, more than 60% of the youth are affected by violence. Many have tried to leave, But cities in Pakistan have not welcomed Pashtuns. They say they are targeted and treated as second-class citizens. In this protest, the long-suffering Pashtuns have found their voice. Their demand is simple: a life of dignity. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The Pashtuns are also the victims of history. Like so many others in South Asia, someone drew a line on a piece of paper and they ended up in a different country. This is the story of another arbitrary border, one of the many bloody legacies of the British in South Asia. Pakistan and Afghanistan, Pakistan and India, India and China, India and Nepal, all the border disputes have their origin in the ill-conceived borders left behind by the British. Borders which divided communities and threw together disparate groups. Lines which over time erupted as the fault lines of South Asia. Look at the border that divides Afghanistan and Pakistan. It is called the Durand Line. Almost 2,500 kilometers long, the border was named after the then Foreign Secretary of Undivided India, Henry Mortimer Durand. This boundary was set without taking into account the ethnic groups that lived in this region. So the line cut straight through Pashtun land. It split the Pashtuns into two separate countries. The Pashtuns on the Pakistan side made up more than half of the total Pashtun population. After these lines were drawn, they came under the control of the Punjabis. Of course, the Pashtuns did not like it. But this was only the beginning of their problems. The Durand Line, you see, is a porous border. In the 1980s, it was exploited by the US and Pakistan to supply arms to the Mujahideen against the Soviets. In the 1990s, the same porous border helped Pakistan in creating the Taliban, the same terror group that would eventually lead to decades of violence against the Pashtuns. As I said, the British committed many such border blunders in this region. You would probably know about this one, the Radcliffe Line, the one that created Pakistan. To draw the actual border, the British flew in a lawyer from London, Sir Cyril Radcliffe. He arrived a month before the British were supposed to leave India, 1 month before. Sir Radcliffe had never visited India before that. He knew very little about the region, but he was the man chosen to divide India. He used census maps to draw the borders. He divided districts on the basis of the dominant religious group that lived there. We all know what followed: communal riots that killed tens of thousands of people. Here's another border that continues to fester. This is the McMahon Line, proposed by British colonial administrator Sir Henry McMahon in 1914. The British drew this line. The Chinese do not accept it. In fact, in 1914, the Chinese envoy who attended the Shimla summit initialed the agreement, but he stopped short of signing it. Later, China rejected the line altogether and called the Shimla negotiations a British attempt to shore up Tibetan autonomy. What did the British do? They left the problem for India to solve. And so, more than a century later, India and China do not have a settled border. As we speak, they're locked in a border standoff in Ladakh. Then we have Nepal. Nepal surrendered a part of its western territory in 1816. That's when the Treaty of Sagauli was ratified. It defines the origin of the Kali River as Nepal's border point with India. But you know what they left out? One small detail: the source of the Kali River. Now also the source of the India-Nepal territorial dispute. Both countries claim Kalapani. And so we have it, decades of disputes which these countries have not been able to solve. South Asia lives with the curse of this British legacy. And we're not done with Pakistan yet. As the Pashtuns march against the Pakistan army, a new political alliance is taking shape in Islamabad. Two long-time political rivals have come together to achieve one common goal: Imran Khan's ouster. Let's begin with the latest. An all-party conference was held in Islamabad on Sunday. Almost all major political parties, opposition parties, attended this conference. It was chaired by leaders of Pakistan People's Party, PPP, and Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, PMLN. The leaders, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari and Maryam Nawaz Sharif. What happened at the meeting? A 26-point joint resolution was adopted. Under this resolution, the opposition in Pakistan has agreed to form an alliance called the Pakistan Democratic Movement. What will this alliance do? It will work in phases with the aim of removing the Pakistan Prime Minister from power. The first phase will begin in October. A wave of rallies and protests will be carried out in all provinces of Pakistan. The second phase will begin in December. This will see opposition leaders themselves hitting the streets to highlight the Pakistan Prime Minister's failures. And the last phase has been scheduled for January 2021, where the opposition will set out on a quote-unquote decisive long march towards Islamabad. This alliance, in fact, also plans on enlisting people from all walks of life, lawyers, traders, farmers, students, media, as well as the civil society or whatever is left of it. They'll be invited to join the movement. The opposition has vowed to use every legal and constitutional option to dethrone Prime Minister Imran Khan. Nawaz Sharif, the former Pakistan Prime Minister, made a special appearance at this conference via video call, and he launched a direct attack against the Pakistan Army. Nawaz Sharif said this struggle is not just against Imran Khan, but also against those who installed an inefficient man like him to power and destroyed Pakistan. Listen to this.
गालिबन एक बार साबिक वज़ीर आज़म यूसुफ रज़ा गिलानी साहब ने कहा था कि यहां स्टेट विद इन स्टेट कायम है, जिसे बर्दाश्त नहीं किया जा सकता। दुख की बात यह है कि अब मामला स्टेट विद इन द स्टेट से आगे निकलकर स्टेट अबव द स्टेट तक जा पहुंचा है। अवाम की हक़ हुक्मरानी को तस्लीम ना करने और नतीजतन मुतवाज़ी यानी पैरेलल हुकूमत का मर्ज ही हमारी मुश्किलात का और हमारे मसाइल की असल जड़ है।
A parallel government is running in Pakistan, says Nawaz Sharif. We're not surprised. The army has always called the shots in Pakistan. What's surprising is the extent to which Nawaz Sharif took his attack against the military generals of Pakistan. The former Prime Minister openly named and shamed Pakistan's pizza general and Imran Khan's close aide, Asim Salim Bajwa.
ये वही जनरल आसिम सलीम बाजवा हैं जिनके खानदान की बेपनाह दौलत और दुनिया भर में फैले हुए असासों की तफसीलात पूरी कौम के सामने आ चुकी हैं। उन हकाइक को न सिर्फ छुपाया गया बल्कि मुबैना तौर पर एससीसीपी के सरकारी रिकॉर्ड में रद्दोबदल भी की गई। 15-20 साल के अरसे में अरबों रुपए के ये सासे कहां से बन गए, ये पूछने की किसी की मजाल नहीं।
It was quite a speech. Too bad most of it ended up getting censored because several television stations in Pakistan muted Nawaz Sharif's audio as he named Asim Salim Bajwa and called out Imran Khan. The headlines are on your screen. They've created quite a stir on social media. Pakistani netizens uploading uncensored clips from Nawaz Sharif's speech. The former Prime Minister is winning praises on the internet, which brings us to a question. Is the embattled Nawaz Sharif eyeing a political comeback? Why is he saying what he is? Look at the developments. Besides the scathing address against the Pakistani army, Nawaz Sharif has also launched a Twitter account. And the first tweet he put out was a birthday wish for Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, the chairman of Pakistan People's Party. Nawaz Sharif is certainly up to something. But to make a political comeback, he will first have to return to Pakistan. The 70-year-old has been living in London since November last year. He was supposed to attend a hearing in a corruption case on the 10th of September, but he missed the court deadline. His lawyers say he will not be coming back anytime soon because of health complications. And given the scathing remarks he's been making against the Pakistani military, an easy return seems highly unlikely. Comeback or no comeback, the virtual politics of Nawaz Sharif could spell trouble for Imran Khan. All eyes now on the opposition's next move. We'll be tracking these developments closely. For the moment, let's look at what China is doing. When China tried to provoke India in the southern part of the Pangong Tso, the Indian army gave the PLA a befitting reply. Did China learn any lessons from it? Looks like it did not. How else will you explain what China has been up to? Beijing has opened 3 fronts. It is provoking India, the United States and Taiwan at the same time. I'm sure you're already aware what's happening in Ladakh. The PLA has engaged the Indian troops since April. China has provoked India at several points along the LAC, that is the line of actual control. The two sides are currently holding commander-level talks in Moldo. This is on the Chinese side of the LAC. And for the first time ever, such a meeting is being attended by a diplomat. India is calling for dialogue and disengagement, but China has refused to step back from the Pangong Tso. FYI, this is the 6th military-level talk since the month of June. So is China interested in peace at all? It appears it's not. Look at the videos that Beijing has been releasing. It released a video on the Chinese Air Force's Weibo account, this one. It shows the Chinese forces carrying out a simulated attack on what looks like the US base of Guam. This is a 2-minute, 15-second video. It's a rather dramatic one. Looks straight out of Hollywood. And in fact, if you ask me, it looks like a rip-off of the Hurt Locker or The Rock. Look at the video. It shows the H-6 bombers taking off from a desert base. The video is called The God of War H-6L Goes on the Attack. Halfway through it, you can see the pilot bombing a runway. The satellite images of this runway resemble the Anderson Air Force Base of the United States. This is where Guam is located on the map. The island is home to major U.S. military facilities, and it is the first response location for any U.S. military activity in Asia. So what explains this video? To answer that question, we must look at what the Chinese have been doing in the Taiwan Strait. China has been carrying out drills near Taiwan. Chinese jets crossed the midline of the Taiwan Strait several times over the weekend. Multiple military drills carried out over Friday and Saturday. Reports claim that China carried out at least 40 sorties, 40. Taipei listed out the Chinese jets that crossed the midline of the Taiwan Strait. Let me give you the list. 2 H-6 bombers, 8 J-16 fighters, 4 J-10 fighters, 4 J-11 fighters. This was on Friday. Let's talk about what happened on Saturday. 12 J-16 fighters, 2 J-10 fighters, 2 J-11 fighters, 2 H-6 bombers, and 1 Y-8 anti-submarine warfare aircraft. The Taiwanese have taken note of everything. Taiwan said it has the right to self-defense. In the statement, the country's defense ministry said it followed the guideline of no escalation and conflict and no triggering incidents. So back to the question, what triggered the Chinese provocation? Here's the answer. U.S. Undersecretary Keith Krach was in Taiwan over the weekend. And the military drills and the Weibo video was China's way of sending a message to Taipei and Washington. China wants to maintain that Taiwan is a part of its territory. Not surprised that when Beijing was asked about the drills in the Taiwan Strait, it said the provocation was reasonable. Listen to this.
The current military drills are a reasonable, necessary action given the current situation in the Taiwan Strait. They are aimed at safeguarding national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Taiwan is a sacred and inseparable part of China. Taiwan is purely an internal Chinese affair that needs no foreign interference. Recently, the US and the Democratic Progressive Party have colluded with each other very closely and are frequently causing issues, whether it is using Taiwan as leverage to curb China or relying on another's power to bully or frighten others. This is just wishful thinking and doomed to fail.
Keith Krach is the second senior U.S. official to visit Taiwan in recent times. And just to refresh your memory, U.S. Health Secretary Alex Azar was in Taiwan in August. This visit made China so insecure that it did not just stop at drills and the dramatic video. The CCP's mouthpiece, China Daily, has published a rather bitter editorial this morning. It said the United States, in fact, was trying to use Taiwan to contain China. China Daily also added And I'm quoting here, the US administration should not be blinkered in its desperation to contain the peaceful rise of China and indulge in the US addition to its hegemony. Neither Taiwan nor the US responded to the Chinese provocation militarily. What if they did? What if India, the United States and Taiwan decide to jointly retaliate? Will the PLA be able to sustain the joint forces? Let's look at the numbers. China has 2.18 million men, active military personnel. India, Taiwan and the United States put together, 3 million. So China is outnumbered. Before sending aircraft to the Taiwan Strait, China should also look at this, its aircraft strength, 3,210. If you combine the number of aircraft of India, Taiwan and the US, the number is 16,131. Let's talk tanks. China, 3,500. 11,761 if you combine India, Taiwan and America. So what exactly is China thinking in opening up multiple battle fronts? Why would it engage 3 countries at the same time, especially when it includes the world's most powerful and 4th most powerful armies? How will it fight such strong countries? The editor of the Global Times has a master plan. This is what he wrote recently on Weibo, and I'm quoting, "If we have no choice but war, we should first avoid direct conflict with the US. We can instead severely beat up a US running dog that always crosses our bottom line to send a warning." This is the same Global Times that previously called Australia a gum that was stuck to China's shoe. Now it is calling Australia a US running dog. The Global Times editor is sounding a war bugle. He's opening a 4th front with Australia. And must we remind him of China's numerous tussles in the South China Sea? How many reports will it take for China to understand that it cannot afford a war at this point? Speaking of fighter jets and war, Switzerland is facing a unique dilemma. It wants to spend billions on new fighter jets. But the government is being asked a rather difficult question. Does Switzerland need fighter jets at all? The country maintains military neutrality, so why does it need warplanes? Also, who is Switzerland's enemy? Our next report explores.
This is Switzerland. Just 41,285 square kilometers in size. Zoom out and you realize that Switzerland is surrounded by the NATO, France, Italy and Germany. Switzerland has no prominent enemies. Its foreign policy dictates military neutrality. And one can't think of a reason why any country would want to attack it. But the Swiss government wants to spend $6.6 billion on warplanes. The current fleet of F-1-18 Hornets go out of service in 2030. So Switzerland is looking at buying either the Airbus Eurofighter or the Dassault's Rafale. Also on the table are Boeing's FA-18 Super Hornet and Lockheed Martin's F-35A Lightning II. Whatever be the choice, the procurement will cost over $6.6 billion, which is a sizable portion of Switzerland's $715 billion GDP. Can Switzerland afford these warplanes? Yes, it can. Does Switzerland need these warplanes? Well, that's a tricky question, and the answer is likely to vary depending on who you ask. Priska Seiler-Graf is a member of the Swiss parliament. She has one question for the Swiss government. Who is our enemy? The question calls for serious reflection. If you look at history, it's been 173 years since the Swiss army fought a war. It was in 1847, during the Sonderbund. Since then, the country's troops have only been mobilized against possible invasion. That too, only twice. Back in the 1500s, Swiss mercenaries were among Europe's most feared troops. In World War I, the country had around 220,000 frontline troops. During the Second World War, Switzerland maintained armed neutrality. The stand remains unchanged, 75 years on. In fact, Switzerland has the oldest policy of military neutrality. As for its strength, today the Swiss army has around 21,000 active personnel. There are approximately 326 tanks. It has 0 attack helicopters and a defense budget of $5 million. Switzerland has no prominent enemies. But does that mean it can do without being prepared for the worst? Or will the jets be nothing more than expensive toys? The question has now been put to the Swiss voters. They will cast their vote in a referendum scheduled for the 27th of September. That is the coming Sunday. The vote may not favor the purchase. Why do we say so? Again, history. In 2014, Swiss voters rejected the purchase of Gripen jets. In 1989, 35% of the Swiss voters wanted to scrap the country's army. What's the need, they asked. Say Switzerland decides not to buy the jets, will it be the only country without a fleet of functional warplanes? Far from it. Ireland, Malta and Luxembourg do not have jets, neither does Somalia or Liberia. Bureau Report, we own. World is one.
Let's look at Myanmar. The country goes to polls in November as it inches closer to the final day of voting. A new challenger to Aung San Suu Kyi's rule is making headlines. She was once a member of Suu Kyi's party. She's now fighting against her. Who is this leader and what chance does she stand? Here's a report.
November 2015. Myanmar's first general election after 50 years of military rule reaches its conclusion. The National League for Democracy wins a landslide victory. Questions are raised on the fairness of the election process, but all sides accept the result as the will of the people. 25% of parliamentary seats are taken by Myanmar's powerful military generals. And Aung San Suu Kyi is sworn in as the state councillor. It's been 5 years, and this Nobel laureate turned military apologist faces her first big test. Myanmar is going to the polls again, the country's second genuine general election. Polling is slated for November 8th, and campaigning is in full swing. 75-year-old Suu Kyi is eyeing another landslide victory. Standing against her is a younger candidate once booted from Suu Kyi's party. Meet Thet Thet Khin, the 53-year-old challenger of the Lady of Myanmar. A student activist, a medical doctor, a businesswoman, and now head of the Youthful People's Pioneer Party. She's promising to transform her country and put an end to autocratic rule.
NLD is no longer the solution for the country. And then the way the party is run is very chaotic, and then it's very autocratic within the party. One person is making all the decisions without consulting any members in the party.
The PPP is promising more jobs, higher wages and lower taxes. It is targeting a broad demographic. The party has fielded Myanmar's first openly gay candidate, a Muslim nominee, and also a hardline Buddhist. It is also trying to bridge the rift between the civilian government and the military leadership of the country.
The military, maybe they overreact the situation, but it's not genocide or ethnic cleansing, no.
As Thet Thet Khin tries to win public favor in Myanmar's capital Naypyidaw, not too far away in the city of Yangon, a Rohingya politician has been barred from contesting polls. Abdul Rashid, the son of a Burmese civil servant, has been disqualified for failing to prove his father's citizenship.
This is the pension letter of my father. This is an updated ID of my mother. The Myanmar Election Commission rejected me even though I submitted the candidacy form with all required documents. I don't know what the matter is and I can't find any answer.
More than 730,000 Rohingyas are said to have fled the Rakhine state in 2017. Out of the 600,000 who remain, most will not be able to vote this November due to lack of citizenship. No voter lists have appeared at polling centres in Rohingya-dominated areas. The community remains disenfranchised. As the Myanmar military still fights accusations of human rights abuses, the election in November may just be the most crucial and controversial in Myanmar's history. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The pandemic has brought with it all sorts of challenges. One of the biggest ones is the shortage of funds. Fighting a crisis means shelling out money. But what if you have the money and don't know how to spend it? Spain is facing this one-of-a-kind challenge. More in our next report.
Not having enough money is not a unique crisis. The world over, people and governments struggle to make ends meet. But what about those who have money and don't know how to spend it? Welcome to Spain. The country is fighting an odd crisis. It's high on cash but low on ideas. Spain does not know how to spend. It's got $166 billion in grants and loans. This is from the European Union Recovery Fund for the COVID-19 crisis. And the crisis is severe. Spain's economy slumped 18.5% in the second quarter, the second worst in the region after the UK. Spain's ailing economy will receive around 140 billion euros or $166 billion out of the EU's 750 billion euro coronavirus recovery package. This includes 43 billion euros in grants in the next 2 years alone. This is equivalent to about 8% of Spain's annual expenditure. This is not a crisis of money. It is a crisis of ideas. Spain needs concrete investment projects to rescue the economy. Coming in the way is a prolonged political paralysis. The country has not been able to approve a full-year budget since 2016. So suddenly absorbing all that extra cash is a challenge. There are concerns over how to set up the machinery to take on this amount of liquidity. And this, by the way, is cash that the Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, fought hard for at an EU summit in July. He has now put his office in charge and the Economy Minister is finalizing a plan to be presented to Brussels by October 15. There are many countries that would love to be in Spain's position. In April, when the pandemic began, over 90 countries requested the International Monetary Fund for emergency funds. And then you have war-torn countries like Afghanistan and Yemen that have been combating COVID-19 amid the raging conflicts. Spain's crisis sounds like a luxury.
Belarus continues to remain on the boil. Long-ruling strongman Alexander Lukashenko is facing massive protests since his return to power in a disputed election. But Europe's last dictator now faces a new challenge in the form of sanctions by the European Union. Our next report brings you the latest.
It has been over 40 days since Lukashenko returned to power, but the European Union is yet to act. The leaders of the bloc have gathered in Brussels. Their main aim, discussing sanctions to be imposed. But the focus is on Belarus opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. The stay-at-home mom has become the face of the opposition. And now her appearance at the European Parliament mounts pressure on Lukashenko. Svetlana urged the bloc to show some courage and step up its support for her movement.
We will protest as long as it's needed, for weeks, months, and even years to come, if necessary. Belarusians will no longer be hostages of Lukashenko's regime. We will no longer live in his prison cell. Our peaceful protesters were met with violence. In the prisons, they were tortured, harassed, and raped.
So what is the bloc planning for Belarus? The EU has a list of around 40 Belarusian officials, the men and women it holds responsible for rigging the polls. Brussels is set to hit these members with asset freezes and travel bans. Will the list include Lukashenko? Europe hasn't decided that. It faces a more urgent question, getting all members on board for a decision. The EU can only impose sanctions if all the 27 members support them, and one of its smallest member states has now become a roadblock. Cyprus says that it supports sanctions on Belarus, but wants actions against Turkey as well. The European Union also remains wary of taking a strong line, which could instead drive Lukashenko further into the arms of his old friend, Putin. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
And now for our daily segment on the US election, 43 days to go. After protests, vaccines, wildfires, corruption and presidential health and character, America is now bracing for a showdown on a vacant Supreme Court seat. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the longtime US Supreme Court justice, passed away this weekend. She was 87 years old, and she leaves behind a legacy of courageous decisions. She challenged the prejudice embedded deep within American laws. American citizens are mourning her demise. American presidential hopefuls are turning it into an election issue. The US president is looking for her successor. He's all set to announce a nominee this week. So far, Trump has voiced his preference to nominate a woman for this post, rather. Listen to this.
As we meet tonight, our nation mourns the loss of a legal giant, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Her landmark rulings, fierce devotion to justice, and her courageous battle against cancer inspire all Americans. You may agree, you may not disagree with her, but she was an inspiration to a tremendous number of people. I say all Americans. So we will uphold equal justice under the law for citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed. I will be putting forth a nominee next week. It will be a woman. It will be a woman.
It will be a woman, says Trump. Who exactly? Let's take a look at two possible frontrunners. 48-year-old Amy Coney Barrett is said to be a favorite among religious conservatives. She was appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit in 2017, and she has been in favor of Trump's hardline immigration policies. The second possible nominee could be 52-year-old Barbara Lagow. She was appointed to the Florida Supreme Court in 2019, the first American Cuban to serve the state's highest court, and given Trump's newfound admiration for the Hispanic community, she could be his choice. As America waits for Trump's announcement, the Democrats are accusing Donald Trump of abusing power. They say that he should not appoint a replacement before the election. Remember, we're talking about the nomination to a seat which has the final say in all legal matters in America. The appointment made will be for a lifetime. America's Supreme Court judges are appointed for life. Joe Biden is questioning Trump's haste to make this appointment. He says it shows that the U.S. president's decision will be politically motivated.
The United States Constitution was designed to give voters one chance to have their voice heard. And who serves on the court? And by the way, there's no court session between now and the end of this election. That moment is now for the voters to get a chance to be heard. And their voice should be heard. And I believe voters are going to make it clear they'll not stand for this abuse of power, this constitutional abuse.
Constitutional abuse, says Joe Biden, and that's not the only thing that he had to say. Biden has also addressed Trump's fellow Republicans in his speech. He has asked them to stand up to Trump's abuse of power, as he calls it, follow their conscience and uphold their constitutional duty.
So I appeal to those few Senate Republicans, the handful who really will decide what happens. Please follow your conscience. Don't vote to confirm anyone nominated under the circumstances President Trump and Senator McConnell have created. Don't go there. Uphold your constitutional duty, your conscience.
Surprisingly, Biden's appeal seems to have resonated with some members of the Republican Party. At least 2 GOP senators are against filling the vacant seat before November. Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Both of them say that the decision should be made after the 3rd of November. They say they'll be voting against Donald Trump's decision. And this is a very significant development. You see, Republicans control the Senate with a 53-47 majority. They only need 51 votes to confirm a new justice after the formal nomination. The Democrats too need 51 votes to stall the appointment. So if 2 more Republican senators break party lines, the Democrats will be able to block a confirmation vote. All eyes are now on 3 people: Cory Gardner of Colorado, Chuck Grassley of Iowa, and Mitt Romney of Utah, 3 of Trump's fiercest critics in the Republican Party. But will they break party lines just before an election? We shall find out soon enough. On that note, it's also a wrap on this edition of Gravitas. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.